I know how it is. My mother has worked in an office of her life, and stories like this aren't just made up. This isn't for views, it's about real experiences and mistakes that too many people repeat. All names, companies, and addresses are fictional. The goal is for you to recognize yourself and leave the room in the time when you need to.
The fire alarm hadn't gone off yet, but my body knew before the system did. 1 second, I was half listening to a slide about sensor modernization, and the next, Isaac's hand was on my wrist. Tight, urgent. His mouth barely moved as he leaned in. Leave the office, now. His eyes didn't match his voice. They were wide, flat, scared. I whispered, "Why?" And he said nothing for a beat too long. Then, "Just trust me. Go." I stood. Not fast, just slow enough to make it look like I was heading for the restroom, but my heart was already in my throat. I walked past rows of my coworkers staring up at a screen filled with buzzwords, past the executive row where Nadia Voss stood smiling at the podium, past the maintenance guy fidgeting by the back wall who wouldn't meet my eyes. By the time I reached the stairwell, I was trembling. I took the stairs, not the elevator, 5 floors down, palms sweating on the rail, and walked out the back service exit into the loading dock. The second the sun hit my face, I exhaled like I'd been underwater. Hey, quick favor while you're here. If you're listening to this and haven't subscribed yet, it would really mean a lot to the team. 97% of people forget, and it's a small tap that helps us tell more of these stories. Go ahead and like the video too if it's pulling you in. All right, back to it. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the public library off Meridian Street, parked in the far back where the cameras were half busted, and made my way to the 3rd floor computer lab. My hands were still shaking when I logged into my off-site archive, one I maintained outside Veilcore Systems, not because I was sneaky, but because I didn't trust cloud redundancy for systems that could kill people if someone fat-fingered a setting. 5 minutes later, I felt it. Not heard. Felt. The library windows trembled. Every head in the room turned toward the glass. Outside, somewhere distant but close enough to matter, a thin plume of gray smoke started rising over the rooftops. I clicked open the pressure logs. My archive pulled data directly from the HVSI nodes and chemical release ducts in Building 3. And there it was. Spikes, anomalies, failures, a vent override issued at 10:41 a.m., pressure breach logged at 10:42. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. I hadn't imagined it. Something had gone wrong. Something Isaac had seen before anyone else. And then a second window blinked open, an automatic alert I'd set up to notify me of changes made from unauthorized credentials. CTO Assistant ID, same one I'd flagged last quarter for accessing hazard routing protocols they weren't trained to touch, and whoever it was had disabled the backup sensor suite in the West Wing, right before the spike. Back at headquarters, they'd call it a tech malfunction. Blame it on old wiring, a failed detector, maybe even me if they got desperate. But I had logs, screenshots, metadata. I'd always been the invisible glue, and now that glue was starting to pull the cracks apart. And the thing about cracks is, once you start looking at them, you realize just how deep they run. It started like it always does, small. Just a skipped step here, a missed signature there. But in my world, that's not small. That's the opening beat in a disaster symphony. By late April, I started noticing odd gaps in the work order chains. Building 3 had scaffolding up and crews going in and out, but there was no compliance request logged for renovations. No Form 22B, no fire risk assessment, not even a courtesy heads up to facilities. That was a problem. At Veilcore, even changing light fixtures in chemical zones required 2 signatures and a clearance check. This wasn't an oversight. This was something deliberate. When I brought it up to our new VP, Nadia Voss, she just smiled like I'd complimented her on her shoes. "We're streamlining," she said, tapping a glossy binder with the word agility across the front like it was holy scripture. Too much red tape was slowing down innovation. She even winked. That was new. My last boss didn't wink. He just turned gray and retired the week after our last EPA audit. I didn't push it. I just nodded and went back to my desk. But Isaac noticed I didn't open my yogurt that day. "What's eating you?" he asked, tapping my desk with a capped Sharpie. I told him about the maintenance bypass. His face didn't change, but his voice dropped. "They're fast-tracking something. Feels off. Want me to poke around in logistics manifests?" I nodded. Of course I did. Then came the sticky note. It was slapped crooked on the corner of a rolled-up blueprint I found sitting in my physical mailbox. Yes, the real one. The note just said, "Per Nadia, skip 3B failsafe for speed." Black ink, no initials, no timestamp, just smugly anonymous. Now here's the thing. Failsafe 3B wasn't some luxury feature. It was a pressure release valve tied to the refrigerant line that ran across the North Lab wing. Skipping it was like sealing a bottle of Coke, shaking it and deciding the cap was optional. I unrolled the blueprint and scanned for changes. Then I cross-checked the updated routing diagrams against the last approved set. Someone had altered the line to accommodate a new compound. That part wasn't visible unless you knew how to read the material code abbreviations tucked in the pipe specs. R22X, a compound I didn't recognize. I ran it through the ValeCore inventory system. No hits, so I tried something else. I checked the inbound materials log for the week prior. Manual signatures, not digital. One name popped up, D. Voss, and next to it, handwritten under Material Description, Trial Coolant per Lab 7. There was no EPA permit, no chemical handling protocol, no exposure mitigation sheet, nothing. The air felt heavier. That night, I stayed late, long after everyone else had left. I brought up the system logs for the last 90 days and filtered by admin overrides. Someone had been disabling alert thresholds for specific wings during nighttime hours. Emergency ventilation protocols had been muted, pressure alarms silenced, and each change was made from the same 3 terminal IDs, one of which was last used by Nadia's executive assistant. It didn't add up. None of it. And the deeper I dug, the more I found that wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. There was this moment. I remember it clearly, where I sat back in my chair, the hum of the server room down the hall buzzing like a second heartbeat, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. If there was a pressure breach in that section of the building, we wouldn't even know. The alarms wouldn't go off. The fail-safes had been skipped. The data streams rerouted. People could get hurt. Not in a theoretical way, not in a compliance risk exposure way. I'm talking skin burning, lung destroying, long-term cancer kind of hurt, and nobody was watching it but me. I thought about going to Martin, but Martin had been off lately, distracted, nervous, not like before, the kind of nervous that smelled like job insecurity, the kind that made him nod at Nadia in meetings and agree with whatever fast-track initiative she tossed out next, no matter how flimsy. So I decided to do what I always did, document everything. I created a new off-grid directory, copied the pressure map deltas, pulled before and after screenshots of system alerts, made a little zip file of quiet, damning proof. It wasn't time to scream yet, but the match had been struck. And I was holding the gasoline. It was one of those sterile Monday mornings where everything smells like the burned coffee and overconfidence. The break room had been stocked with those mini fruit cups again, Nadia's way of pushing wellness, and the all-hands meeting was set up like a pep rally for people who hated their jobs quietly. I sat in the back with Isaac, both of us pretending to care, while Nadia strutted across the stage with a headset mic like she was headlining a TED Talk on corporate gaslighting. Slide after slide, all buzzwords. Agile restructuring, cross-functional velocity. Then she hit a phrase that made the blood drain from my face. Temporary sensor downtimes. My hand froze on my notepad. She said it so casually, like sensors were optional, like safety protocols were seasonal fashion trends. And then Isaac leaned in. He didn't whisper right away. He just turned his head, locked eyes with me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in 6 years of working next to him. Fear. Not panic, not drama. Just cold, measured, rational fear. Then, just above a whisper, he said, "Leave the office, now." My mouth opened, automatic. Why? His voice didn't waver. "Just trust me. Go." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an evacuation order in disguise. My mind raced. The failed valve, the rerouted coolant lines, the ghost logins, the sticky note, the muting of alarms. Isaac knew something. Or saw something. Or maybe he just had better timing than I did. Either way, I wasn't going to sit around waiting for a fireball to prove him right. I stood up, clutching my stomach like I had a bad lunch. Nobody looked twice. Nobody cared. That's the thing about being invisible glue. You can vanish and the machine keeps running. until it doesn't. I walked out of the conference room, forced myself not to break into a sprint, made it to the elevator, pressed the button, then stopped. I didn't trust it. Too slow, too vulnerable. I turned and took the stairs. 5 flights, echoing with every step, each one louder than the last. My palms were slick with sweat. I reached the bottom landing, shoved open the service door, and stepped into the loading dock. The sunlight didn't feel warm. It felt foreign, like I'd stepped out of a dream into someone else's life. I didn't go home. I didn't even think about home. I got in my car and drove, autopilot, to the public library on Meridian, where I'd set up an emergency login point months ago, just in case the digital ecosystem at ValeCore ever got compromised. I parked behind the building, kept my head down, walked up the back steps, and slid into a 3rd-floor computer cubicle like I'd rehearsed it. I typed in the VPN code by muscle memory, logged into my offsite compliance archive, and pulled up the real-time sensor data snapshot I'd built for emergencies. And then I felt it. The floor trembled, just for a second. A low-frequency thud, barely perceptible. But every person in that room froze. I looked up. The librarian at the front desk was staring at the windows. A few seconds later, a flicker of smoke rose in the distance, thin, gray, coming from the direction of the industrial park. I clicked into the logs. There it was, time-stamped and unfiltered. Pressure spike, Building 3, 10:42 a.m. Vent override issued 10:41 a.m. Failsafe bypassed, no alert triggered. Airborne compound dispersal, unknown range. My stomach dropped. Then a new line appeared, an active login from the master console at 10:40 a.m. Username, iMercer, Isaac. He'd seen it before anyone. Maybe just a hint. A flash of a dashboard warning, enough to put it all together. He could have shouted. He could have stopped the meeting. He could have tried to play hero, but he didn't. He leaned in, he whispered, and he gave me the only thing that mattered in that moment. Time to leave. No glory, no drama, just one sentence that saved my life. The blast wasn't cinematic. It didn't shatter windows or send a mushroom cloud into the sky, but it was real. The kind of real that sends your heart into your throat before your brain catches up. It started with a tremor, barely noticeable from where I sat in the public library cubicle, my fingers frozen over the keyboard, eyes locked on the muted flat-screen TV hanging above the printer station. Channel 6 was already on the scene. Reports of a ventilation failure and possible chemical release at ValeCore Industries in the Northeast Industrial Corridor. Smoke curled from a rooftop vent like a warning breath. First responders moved in with masks and pressurized tanks. A drone shot showed 2 floors being evacuated. People with jackets pulled over their noses, stumbling into the daylight with confusion and panic on their faces. My face stayed perfectly still, but inside, everything was shaking. I minimized the live feed and pulled up the archive node I'd been monitoring for months, the off-grid system that mirrored real-time sensor data across all of Building 3. It only existed because I didn't trust our internal IT firewalls. Too many hands, too many egos, not enough accountability. I filtered by the last 3 hours. Pressure spike, 10:42 a.m., failsafe trigger, disabled sensor feedback, muted remotely. Override credentials, user, ctotech.ops2. Terminal, remote. VPN origin, internal, not external, not spoofed. It wasn't an accident, not an act of God, not a freak equipment failure. It was human. Someone had reached in and shut the alarms off like they were flipping off a porch light. Then they walked away and left everyone inside to choke on it. My cursor hovered over the metadata trace. The name wasn't in plain text, but the user credentials matched a string I'd seen before, assigned to Nadia's tech liaison, the same one who'd been in meetings where I flagged the exact system that failed today, the same one who'd rolled his eyes when I brought up the risks of fast-tracking the sensor transition phase. And then I saw it. 10:40 a.m., 2 minutes before the blast. A login from the master console. Brief, just 30 seconds, no input commands, just a visual access log. Username, iMercer, Isaac. He saw it. The pressure buildup, the overrides, the silencing. That's when he told me to leave. I couldn't breathe for a full minute. The only sound in the library was the hum of fluorescent lights and the muted voice of a news anchor describing localized exposure symptoms and initial reports of a chemical irritant. I wanted to scream. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because this was preventable. We had the data, we had the protocols, and somebody with a badge and a six-figure title, had decided none of it mattered. They rolled the dice, and people inside that building paid for it. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, then answered with trembling fingers. No voice, just a text, blinking on the screen. They're already blaming tech malfunction. Don't speak. Let them bury themselves. I stared at it. Thought about deleting it. Thought about screenshotting it. I did neither, because I knew that voice. Even without a name, I knew the cadence of it, the calculation in those words. This wasn't a warning. It was a strategy. Whoever sent that message knew what I had. Maybe not the full archive, but enough to know I'd been watching, documenting, preparing for exactly this. Let them bury themselves. I leaned back in the creaky library chair, the smell of toner and dry carpet clinging to the air, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Rage, not hot, not loud, cold, slow, like wet concrete setting in the bones. Because this wasn't over. It had just begun. They didn't even wait a full 24 hours. By Tuesday morning, corporate had pushed out a polished internal memo titled Incident Recap and Interim Safety Improvements. It hit inboxes like gospel, official, boring, and loaded with euphemisms. The key phrase? A likely sensor calibration discrepancy in Building 3 appears to have triggered an isolated systems misfire. Discrepancy. Misfire. As if a 30-foot duct exploding into lab space was a sneeze. I read it twice. Then I opened my own archive. Not the public-facing compliance dashboard, not the fake clean logs corporate thought were the real source of truth. I had my shadow archive, the one I built after the training system lost 4 days of audit data 3 years ago. I never told anyone about it, not even Isaac. It was ugly, built from cloned shell scripts and redundant node scrapes running on a rented server farm that billed me $10 a month. But it logged everything. Raw entries, metadata, even access timestamps from internal credentials that IT's logs scrubbed every 90 days. I pulled up the incident window and set the parameters. April 24th, 10:30 a.m. to 10:45 a.m. Building 3, Section N4, Refrigerant Pipeline. The screen populated like a crime scene report. At 10:22 a.m., a remote login to the safety valve subsystem was registered. At 10:41:01 a.m., override command issued to disable emergency vent system. At 10:41:47 a.m., failsafe pressure trigger muted. At 10:42:12 a.m., spike breach logged in pipeline PSI. At 10:42:58 a.m., HVAC duct pressure failed. The remote user ID tied to the override command, it didn't say Nadia. It didn't have to. It said, Kitiotech Ops Do2 assigned according to last quarter's org chart to her assistant, Felix. But I wasn't done. I pulled the access log for Felix's user ID and cross-referenced his login pattern for the last 60 days. Something didn't fit. Felix had never accessed Building 3 logs before the previous Thursday. And when he did, his login coincided with a file edit timestamp on a test protocol labeled X37A. That was the moment my stomach went ice cold. Because X37A wasn't in the standard compound approval tracker. I ran the compound ID through the Federal Chemical Registry. No match. I checked for EPA permits filed by Vailcor for new refrigerants. 0. And yet, the test protocol had been stamped approved, internal use only. No routing ID, no oversight, just a PDF buried 3 folders deep in the lab trials directory. The signature box had 2 sets of initials. One was typed in a digital font, FLEO for Felix probably. The other, handwritten, slanted, confident, NV Nadia Voss. I zoomed in to be sure. It wasn't even a digital overlay. She'd scanned her signature in manually, like she thought it added authority. Like that flourish would protect her from scrutiny. She had signed off on an unregistered chemical compound and greenlit its use without federal clearance, without a hazard rating, and without a single emergency mitigation plan. Then had the nerve to spin a disaster into a calibration issue. I sat back, fists clenched. They weren't just cutting corners. They were hiding a black market experiment behind corporate buzzwords and hoping nobody noticed when people choked on the aftermath. I exported everything. Logs, screenshots, file hashes, video feed snapshots from the maintenance cameras they probably forgot to disable. I encrypted the folder and duplicated it across 3 separate cold storage drives. One for legal, one for insurance, one for me. They thought I was invisible glue? Fine. But they forgot. Glue records where it sticks. And I had every print of every fingerprint they left behind. It wasn't just a blast anymore. It was evidence. It was a footnote in a footnote, buried deep in the 4th addendum of my employment contract between relocation benefits and continuing ed reimbursement. Clause 18C. Most people never read that far. HR certainly didn't. Legal probably skimmed it. But I had it memorized. Imminent hazard identification with failure to act by management triggers whistleblower protections and full severance with non-disparagement waiver removal. 18 little words that didn't mean a thing until they did. I remember the day I negotiated it in. 5 years ago, after a different company nearly lost a junior tech to an unreported refrigerant leak in a test chamber. Management tried to spin that incident too. I was the compliance officer who flagged it, the one who stayed up filing a supplemental safety memo while everyone else went home, and the one who got a warning for being overly cautious. After that, I made sure every offer letter I signed had teeth. Clause 18C was mine. And Vailcor, desperate for someone who could navigate EPA renewals and OSHA blindfolded, agreed. Until now, it was just words in a folder. Now, it was my parachute. I didn't rush, didn't get emotional. I composed a formal hazard notification using internal compliance form 11B, which they hadn't updated since 2014, and attached my offsite system logs, screenshots of override credentials, archived camera stills from Building 3 hallway terminals, the EX37A protocol document, full metadata view, side-by-side comparisons of the official timeline versus my archive. A brief note. Failure to report unauthorized use of an unregistered refrigerant compound with system-level override by management personnel constitutes breach of EPA safety compliance and direct endangerment under Clause 18C. I encrypted the packet and submitted it to both HR and legal using the clause escalation subject line they'd never expected anyone to use. Then I waited. It didn't take long. At 8:36 p.m., I received an email from legalopsavailcore.com with no pleasantries, no signature, just acknowledged. Clause 18C is under internal review. Please refrain from public comment while review is active. No denial, no deflection, just compliance. That's how you know they're scared. Because when you send a paper trail, they know they can't scrub. They don't argue. They stall. They delay. They whisper to each other in conference rooms with the lights off, while their hands shake and their fingers scroll through liability caps in the employee handbook. They hadn't expected anyone to use that clause. They definitely hadn't expected someone to use it right. I backed up my files to 3 physical drives, delivered one to a friend who worked in private counsel, tucked one into a safety deposit box downtown, kept one with me, and then I sat down and started drafting a second document, my severance demand, with terms, with release language, with attached screenshots of the signature page from my onboarding packet, because I wasn't going to wait for their PR team to play spin the blame. They wanted quiet? Good. So did I, but only on my terms. They always say the worst calls come in the middle of the night, but this one came at 7:14 a.m., just after I'd finished my second cup of coffee and before the world remembered how to pretend everything was fine. The number wasn't one I recognized, but the tone was clipped and corporate before I even said hello. This is Evan Miller, Liability Counsel for Atrian Risk Group. We underwrite Vailcore's operational policy. We've reviewed your incident report. Is it accurate? I didn't flinch. Yes, it's all time-stamped. Every file you received can be verified against original metadata. Silence. A long one, then a sharp exhale. Understood. Thank you for your cooperation. Click. By noon, they were in the lobby. 3 black-suited reps, legal briefcases, no smiles, no small talk, and definitely no handshake photo ops. They served the front desk a packet marked Suspension of Coverage Pending Internal Audit, then walked directly into the executive suite without signing the visitor log. Word spread fast, first through Slack, then in breathless whispers outside the break room. The company channels started locking down, and IT sent out a message about temporary network maintenance, which in corporate speak translates to "we're scrambling." I was never mentioned in the internal memo, not once, but I didn't need to be. My fingerprints were on every file Atrian had, every screenshot, every annotated spreadsheet, every flagged warning email I'd sent to the safety committee weeks ago, with subject lines like potential risk exposure, building 3 pressure loop, and failsafe audit needed, high priority. They ignored every one of them. Now they couldn't ignore the audit. I watched the chaos unfold from home, logged into my private dashboard while sipping a tea that had long gone cold. Then, calmly, I drafted one email, addressed to legal, subject line, clause 18C, formal severance trigger request. Attached, the original clause excerpt from my signed contract, the full log of hazard reporting correspondence, the X37A test protocol with approval initials, my compliance form submission timestamp, a PDF of the Atrian audit notice now public. The body of the email was just 2 sentences. Per clause 18C, I request formal release of severance under hazard report protocol. I will not sign any gag clauses. I signed it with my full name, not my badge ID, not my employee number, just the name they never learned to fear until it showed up in an insurance file. They wanted it quiet. Fine. But now, quiet had a price, and I just named it. The envelope was heavy. Not metaphorically, physically, thick stock, security sealed, certified mail with a receipt card still damp from someone's anxious signature at headquarters. It arrived at 2:11 p.m. Friday, tucked between a power bill and a coupon booklet for windshield repair. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of my living room. No alarms, no backdrafts, no spin, just silence. The kind they tried to buy from people like me. Inside the envelope, a formal letter from Vailcore Legal titled Notice of Fulfillment, Clause 18C, a check for full severance, taxed and itemized down to the penny, vesting documentation for all remaining shares in my employee equity plan, a signed statement affirming protection under both state and federal whistleblower statutes, a final page stamped and initialed, no non-disclosure requirements apply to claimant. And tucked between the legal forms, like a rotten cherry on a poisoned sundae, was a note. Handwritten, on soft pink stationery. Nadia's handwriting was unmistakable. Wide loops, confident slant, like someone who'd never been told no until the roof caved in. I'm sorry it ended like this. Nadia. That was it. Not, I'm sorry I ignored your warnings. Not, I'm sorry I approved an unregistered chemical. Not, I'm sorry people got hurt while I chased efficiency metrics and corporate gold stars. Just, sorry it ended like this. As if the ending was a weather pattern, as if none of it had a cause. I didn't respond, didn't crumple it up. I just slid the note into a plastic sleeve, scanned every document, and filed the full package into a directory I labeled Closure. Then I backed it up twice. I didn't post on LinkedIn, didn't send a goodbye email. I didn't need the performance because the money was in my account, the shares were in my name, and the clause, the one they never thought I'd use, stood like a silent witness in every paragraph they signed. They paid. They yielded. And most importantly, they didn't silence me. No settlement gag order, no NDA strings, no spin to sanitize what happened. The absence of denial was the loudest confession of all. 2 months later, on a humid Thursday morning, Vailcore blinked. Their quarterly earnings report, usually released with all the performative sparkle of a PR stunt, was delayed. Not by hours, by days. And when it finally dropped, buried 12 paragraphs deep between bland metrics and recycled growth projections, there it was. 1 line. 1 sentence. Operational loss related to internal compliance failure and third-party investigation. No names, no details, just 6 words that said everything they'd tried to pretend wasn't true. I screenshotted it and texted Isaac. He responded in under a minute. Told you so. That was all. No confetti, no victory lap. We didn't need it. Because the paper trail had spoken louder than any press release ever could. The same company that once called my role non-revenue generating had lost millions over the very systems they bypassed. They'd mocked my backups, my logs, my habit of triple flagging anything that didn't smell right. And now? Clients were emailing me, quiet startups, legacy firms, even a few overseas teams that had heard whispers through shared insurance networks. They didn't want a flashy overhaul. They wanted what I had built under VeilCore's nose. Systems that noticed when rules were skipped, logs that remembered what humans forgot, clauses that snapped shut like jaws when ignored. They didn't want someone to shout safety into a boardroom. They wanted someone who could see failure coming from 10 steps out and build guardrails no one else even noticed. So I started consulting. Not loudly, not publicly, no ads, no blog posts, just one project at a time. Quiet calls, referrals passed hand to hand, and every time a client asked me, how do we make sure we never become them? I said, we start with the files no one wants to read. VeilCore moved on, or pretended to. Nadia transitioned roles to an advisory position somewhere with fewer public filings. Felix's name disappeared from the org chart without a whisper. HR released a mandatory training module about safety culture, complete with a clip art slide of a fire extinguisher and a smiley face. But none of that mattered, because the documents couldn't be unsent. The clause couldn't be deleted, and the damage couldn't be spun into strategy. They buried the truth in meetings. I buried it in metadata, and when the door closed behind me, I didn't slam it. I didn't even turn around. I just walked away with a hard drive full of receipts, and a reputation they'd never silence again.